Let me talk about aging. Facial deformation affects the body's function. In the last video, I talked about how when the face is out of shape, it affects the way the body reacts and the ability of skin. When the shape of the face and the body collapse, there is always a linkage with the skin. The phenomenon of body shape and posture collapsing like the elderly, there is no way to improve it unless we recognize that the skin is stalling the collapse. Unless the accumulation of deformation in the skin is improved, there is no solution to the shape problem. For example, muscle training and dieting to shape the body without the skin position will result in a greater degree of wasted time and effort to control the shape of the body. Since I only briefly talked the fall issue in the last video, let me talk about it in more detail in this video. The skin is more than just a sheet that surrounds the body. The fat on the outside of the skeletal muscles is supported by the skin. So, no matter how much muscle training people do, the skeletal muscle will not directly pressure the fat. This is because the fat is on the outside of the skeletal muscle and it is the skin that is pressing on it. For the purpose of reducing the amount of fat, it is certain that muscle training and dieting are obviously effective ways to do so. While there may be differences of opinion on the ratio of effectiveness, we need to understand that we need to treat our skin. Understanding the skin will be a great value to us and will make our various efforts, such as muscle training and dieting, even more effective. Please understand the skin so that our efforts will not go to waste. It is so different from your image that you need to understand it first. In this article, I will explain step by step the strong power of skin from several perspectives. I would like to start by saying that this is all from the perspective of shape. It's called dermatome and it's found in Brock unit in the innervated area of the skin. Even though this diagram of a person has no real visible pattern, its location is indicated by the distribution by body surface nerves and each area supports a dedicated internal structure. This is the assumption I make in my treatment. I'm not an expert, so I don't know the details, but I considered this way of understanding to be something like somite. For example, a caterpillar, which is a shape of a repeating structure of body segment. The body shape of such an organism would never be disrupted, but this is not the case for humans, whose shape is derived from complex evolution. I believe that when each section of the human dermatome is arranged in an undisturbed manner, the body shape does not collapse. But it is easy to imagine that with age, the arrangement will become quite out of shape. There are more than 30 different body surface nerves distribution maps that have been published so far, and each one represents a very different figure. I believe this is because the subject's body shape collapses in different ways when observed. Let me simply compare some of them. This one is neatly arranged, but this one is quite twisted or misshapen. What I'm seeking for in my treatment is this arrangement. If the area of nerve control in the skin differs depending on the shape of the individual, it may mean that the skin on the body surface also collapses as a component of body shape. As I'm trying to get into shape, I found this diagram very useful. Please understand that I'm thinking of each block of body surface nerve distribution map as a unit of shape. With this diagram in mind, I'm effectively correcting the shape. Let me continue with the explanation. How the body surface is connected to the internal structure. Next, there are these things written by the great anatomist Lauber. Let me accept 3 sentences. The first one, from the inner surface of reticular layer, a rather thick white bundle of fiber extends into the depth. This is called the dermal strata retinacular cutis, and it anchors the skin to the fascia or peristeum. Depending on the location, these stratas may form a solid cord or branches. Connective tissues projection also accompany blood vessels, nerves, glandular ducts, and hair follicles that penetrate the subcutaneous tissue. Second, the skin, even in its normal state, is in a mild state of elastic tension, exerting a salt pressure on nerves that lies beneath it. Thirdly, although the skin itself does not have segmental breaks, the distribution of blood vessels and nerves divides the entire area of skin into dermatomal segments. Let me give you my interpretation in simple terms. First, you can see that the skin and internal structure are definitely connected by the skin strata. In the second, you can see that the internal structure is held in place by the skin. The third shows that the skin has a cohesive structure for each area. Here is an example of the relationship between the internal structure and the dermis, as described in larva. In my interpretation, it describes the arrangement of collagen in the dermis during the tense state when the arm is bent and the tension-free state when it is relaxed. The arrangement of the dermis when it is not tense and when it is tense. When the unstressed skin is cut with a punching tool, the collagen arrangement is close to a diamond shape. However, in the tau dermis, the collagen is arranged in a parallel pattern. In other words, the arrangement of collagen in the dermis observes the tension of the fiber caused by movement. In the unstressed dermis, the wide surface of the skin that remains after being cut out, let me call it A, has a hole in it that widens into a circle, while the cut-out skin, let me call it B, shrinks and becomes smaller. In the tense dermis, the surface of A will lengthen and becomes ellipse in the direction of strong tension, while the cutout skin B will shrink and become shorter in the direction of the strong tension. The shape of both will be longitudinal and transverse, and the long axis will be perpendicular. In other words, you can see that the dermis accepts the internal movement and changes its shape as it is. Since the internal structure and the dermis are connected by the dermal strata as explained earlier, it is only natural that they work together. In the dermis, the arrangement of collagen and elastin is firmly anchored to structures such as sebaceous glands, sweat glands, and nerve fibers as an extension of dermal strata. Also, if you consider the way the skin shrinks after cutting and the dermal strata, you can see how the skin, including the sebaceous glands, sweat glands, and nerve fibers, pressures the internal structure as an exquisite network. The subcutaneous fat, muscles, and skeleton are all supported in position by the skin. Do you now understand the connection between the internal structure and the skin and the weak pressure that is constantly applied to internal structure? Up to this point, you should understand that the movement and distortion of the internal structure is directly transmitted to the dermis. Let me go further. Next, let me tell you about the relationship between the stratum corneum and the dermis. In order to understand why skincare can change the entire shape of the body, you need to understand the relationship between these two. Let me introduce you a paper that looks at skin not from a medical perspective, but from a mechanical perspective. This paper in Japanese also has a great influence on my theory. The paper is called The Relationship Between Skin Aging and Wrinkles from a Mechanical Perspective, and it describes the difference between young skin and old skin. The paper looks at the relationship between the striatum corneum and the dermis from a mechanical perspective. In young people, the striatum corneum buckles and observes the contraction of the skin when the skin also contracts due to muscle contraction, while in older people, the striatum corneum is not flexible and the entire epidermis bent. This puts a strain like a creak on the dermis. As the striatum corneum becomes hardened, the dermis loses its natural softness and bends in a creaking manner. This is a diagram that explains it. The epidermis is divided into two layers, the striatum corneum and the rest of the epidermis. This is the striatum corneum and this is the rest of the epidermis. The dermis is below here. Let me show you the actual movement. This is the striatum corneum and this is the rest of the epidermis. When the striatum corneum is soft and young, each layer stretches and contracts in its own way, like this. This is ideal. The only way for the elderly, whose striatum corneum is hard and deposited, the move is for the epidermis to clump together and move in a big way. Which deteriorates the dermis and establishes wrinkles it described. When a muscle contracts, the skin shrinks, right? When we are young, the striatum corneum and the other layers are in ideal condition, so each layer can contract on its own. So the striatum corneum, epidermis, and the dermis all contract in different ways. It is very ideal, but when the striatum corneum becomes hard, this is not the case. When the striatum corneum and the epidermis become one, they creak and bend in a big way, resulting in wrinkles that look like folds. You can see that when the striatum corneum is soft, the dermis is normal and flexible. The flexibility of the striatum corneum is so important. The condition of the striatum corneum has so much to do with that. Mr. Mitsuhiro Denda, a Japanese dermatology researcher, said that soft and moderately thin skin flexes softly like tissue paper. However, old and thick skin can crack and bend like a piece of cardboard. I will go on their own. Next, let me talk about the spread of the skin. Observation of the skin area. Let's look at the difference between the faces of people in their 80s and 20s from the perspective of skin area. Let me cover the skull with a piece of sheet. This size should be enough to reproduce the face of 20-something with tough skin. Now let's look at the 80s. How large an area of sheet would be needed to cover her face that has grown even larger and more uneven? Maybe this size. Let me show you what the sheet would look like if it covers the face of an 80-something. How can you explain the difference in area with the concept you have? Let me guess from my skincare experience. Even in old age, to some extent, cells are still typing to be generated by cell division in the basal layer of the epidermis. However, if the striatum corneum, the top layer of the epidermis, is not good condition, the produced cell cannot be pushed up to the surface of the epidermis and cannot be peeled off smoothly, so it is compressed little by little while expanding its area. If my customers take care of their skin in a way that encourages the detachment of accumulated cells and leads to metabolism, the area will shrink. The blemishes that were located by the expanded area will shift their position slightly. At first, I thought that this was a phenomenon of shifting within the skin. However, I became convinced that this was not the case, but a change in the size of the skin area itself. The reasons for my conviction are as follows. 1. The entire area of the face is reduced in size. A typical example of this phenomenon occurs when the area around the eyes, which is considered to have thinnest skin, is washed intensively in a unique way I performed, and the entire tissue changes to gather around the eyes. The blemishes move to the direction of eyes, and at the same time, the face appears to be smaller. In the words of my client, the spots, dullness, sagging, and widening of the pores that were here are now moving together around my eyes. This blemishing used to be here, but it has gradually moved, and the area of dark circle is shrinking toward my eye socket. With the skincare, the position of the blemish moves in the direction that they encouraged it to shrink, and at the same time, it brings the bruise to the entire face, making the outer frame of the face smaller. 2. Crack-like depression swell. When the area of skin on the face shrinks, it feels as if the whole area is moving in a certain direction, and the crack-like depressions become plump and raised. And also during the phenomenon, the outer frame of the face became smaller. 3. Customers who take care of their skin at home under my guidance definitely say that they feel that the skin size of their face that fit in the palm of their hand is definitely getting smaller. In other words, they say that they can easily check the ratio of their face to the size of their hands. When they take a picture, the ratio of their face are definitely decreasing. They are getting smaller. The phenomenon is clear from my photo. In other words, as the skin shrinks in area, the face gets smaller and blemishes move. The uncomfortable furrows in the center of face become plump and thick again. In summary, the expansion of skin area affects the size, fullness, crack-like depressions, and position of the face. Let's look at the phenomenon of facial skin spreading a little more separately. 1. Pores become larger and the distance between pores appears. 2. Unevenness in the shape of the face. 3. The face itself becomes larger. There is the expansion of the skin area in the 1, 2, 3 range respectively. Which part of the face is affected depends on the individual. Eventually, all of them will be affected. That's why I said earlier that the area of the face becomes this large. To explain the phenomenon of each individual face, let me make another video. It would be too long. Now that I've explained a little about how the face expands with skin area, let's look at this overly wide face. Now, you can start to imagine how much the internal structure is stretched in such cases where the skin is too wide. It's obvious that the more bumps that from all over the face, the more the area is stretched to the point that it can fit on the surface of the facial skull. If the skin area is spread out many times, as it is on this person's face, how much will it affect the internal structure? The internal structures that are connected to it, such as the facial muscles and facial skull, will be induced to click in their position. This means that The elderly are forced to have a larger and collapsed face. The internal structures tied to the deteriorating skin and forced to move erratically, like rusty heavy machinery. Now that I've explained a little about how the skin causes the face of deform as it expands. So why does it affect the body shape? On the body surface, there are skeletal muscles, right? Please observe them carefully. If the elderly train any of these muscles, will it raise their center of gravity and bring them back to their original body shape? The answer is no. You can see that most of the skeletal muscles of the upper torso in front of the body are in the most horizontal position. No matter which of these muscles they train, the muscles that are fixed to the side will not voluntarily move towards the head. So no matter how much muscle training the elderly do, they will never be able to return to the balance they had when they were younger. So let me tell you why. We humans stand straight and perpendicular to gravity, right? So how can we stand like we are floating upward, defying gravity? What do we rely on? The area of the facial muscles is pulling the entire body up toward the head. When the skin area of the facial muscle is tight enough, it raises the body's center of gravity and shapes the body. It means this is the area. It is very important that the skin area covering facial muscle is not enlarged and that it is contracting normally in its ideal original area, which affects the overall balance of the body. This muscle, which is connected not from skeleton to skeleton, but from skeleton to skin, have a tendency to loosen and spread. As it widens, the internal structure is induced to increase in area to accommodate it. The skin does not expand because the internal structure expands, but the internal structure expands because the skin expands. When the shape of the face is collapsed, the area of the skin covering facial muscles automatically pushes downward, leading the entire position downward. The elderly suffers from this very condition. If you shrink it, it will guide you upward and backward. That is ideal. The facial muscles reside in the front, right? So the front side inevitably spread downward preferentially, which I believe is the cause of the elderly's unique forward-leaning posture. This standing posture of mine in my 30s is actually only about 5 pounds different in weight from now. The front of my body is down and the back is hunched as if I'm carrying something heavy. I can barely put on a pair of low pumps without feeling like I'm going to fall. But now you can see that I'm standing as if I'm floating lightly, and that figure in my 30s is not just because I've gained weight. This is what I meant when I said in my last video that the damage to my face hastened my aging process. I was an old woman in terms of physical condition and ability to think. People feel sluggish, fatigued, and even drained of energy. I know this is very hard theory to believe. Let me briefly show you how much influence the skin can have. Now I'm going to pretend that my left and right legs are on the right and the left respectively. And I'm going to jump up like this. There is no difference between left and right? Now let me bring the nerve areas C4 and T1 back into positions while raising them into place. I've been taking care of my facial skin correctly morning and night with skincare. Since my skin is already flexible, I will only do C4 and T1. Let's shrink them left and right. What do you think? You can see the difference. Only here I did. The shape of the body is sharper, the waist is bent higher, and the legs feel longer. This is simply a matter of putting the high socks that have fallen out of place back into place. When people train in this state, even just a few seconds will do the trick. This is because that their muscles are in the most effective position. Can you understand that the position of the skin are very influential? For those of us who are bipedal and stand perpendicular to gravity, consider the skin covering facial muscles area to be effective for maintaining good posture. It is very important to contract and relax the face to keep the body constantly in a normal shape and to stop it from dropping to resist gravity. It is the skin covering facial muscles that tend to spread, as explained earlier. The eyes and the mouth must move normally, and the nose and ears must stay soft and in place. These are all prerequisites for life. Now, to make it easier to understand, I would like to tell you the phenomenon and how to recognize when the area of the facial muscles has expanded. The forehead protrudes. The area of around the eyes widens and becomes hollow and wrinkled. The shape of the nose becomes hard and broken, hollowing out of the side of the nose laugh line. The face line becomes stiff and large, leading forward posture. The area of inverted trapezoid connecting the shoulders and bust becomes larger. Tubular surging of the torso, lowering of the belly, waist gets bigger. The ankles become thicker. Are you beginning to understand why people have the unique body shape of the elderly? Do you understand why I have undergone this change? The shape of the body goes through an incredible amount of changes over the years. It is very important to understand this process in order to control aging. What I'm looking for is a better understanding of the process of change in the face and the body. What I want is for the process of facial and body shape changes to be understood, and for people to realize that they can be improved. I try to show them for real that a little bit of skincare can make a big difference in a very short time. And I believe that this experience will change people's consciousness. The skin is an organ that has the ability to maintain and control the shape of the human's body. I will continue to suggest that it is the only organ that can promote vital function and rejuvenation by controlling our shape. In the next video titled Mechanical Stimulation for Our Health, I will tell you why you should control the skin on your face with vibration. Thank you for watching until the end. See you in the next video.